The snowfall and the plea snow was falling hard on the planet Kirosnine. The wind howled like a wild animal, and the sky was dark with heavy clouds. It was not a place where life should exist. But something was out there, moving through the storm. Jake Morgan, a young human soldier, walked carefully with his scanner in hand. He was part of a search team looking for rare crystals needed for Earth's energy. The war had ended 2 years ago, but this planet still felt like a battlefield. Frozen forests, broken ruins, and strange shapes hiding in the mist made every step feel dangerous. "Team Bravo, report in," said a voice in his earpiece. "This is Morgan." "All clear in Sector D," he answered, but something wasn't clear, not really. Jake had heard something just a minute ago. It was soft, like a whisper or a child's cry. He looked around, the snow making it hard to see more than a few meters. Ahead, his scanner beeped, but the signal was weak. He stepped off the path against protocol. But he had a feeling something wasn't right. He moved between 2 broken trees and stopped. There in the snow was a shape, small and trembling. He raised his rifle but didn't shoot. It was a woman not human, her skin pale blue and her eyes large and black. She was kneeling, holding a small child close to her chest. Both looked half-frozen, skin cracked from the cold. Jake's heart pounded. He had seen alien enemies before, had fought them, but this was different. She wasn't attacking, she wasn't hiding a weapon, she was crying. The alien mother looked up at him. Her voice was broken, weak, but she spoke in English, barely. "Please, just one warm meal for my daughter. Please." Jake didn't move. This could be a trick, a trap, or some leftover rebel trying to get close, but the child wasn't moving much. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. He looked around, no signs of other life. No soldiers, no drones. "Why are you out here, huh?" he asked. The mother looked down, her thin arms shaking. "No choice. We run, we hide. Humans take everything." Jake felt his fingers tighten on the rifle. He didn't like being blamed, but deep inside, he knew she wasn't lying. The expansion war had been brutal, and Earth's leaders didn't leave much behind. Still, this wasn't a time for guilt. This was a time to decide he could walk away. Call for backup, report her, but she would die before help came. Both of them would. He looked at the child again, her eyes barely open. Something in him snapped. "Get up," he said. Lowering his rifle, the alien mother looked confused, then afraid. "Are you taking us?" Jake nodded, but not the way she expected. "I'm taking you somewhere warm. Somewhere safe, but you have to trust me." She slowly stood, her legs weak, holding the child close. Jake took off his own thermal jacket and wrapped it around them. It was against every rule he had been trained to follow, but this didn't feel like war. It felt like something else. He tapped his comms. "This is Morgan, returning to camp. Scanner failed. Coming in manually. Copy that," came the reply. He hoped no one asked too many questions. As they walked, he kept one hand near his sidearm, just in case, but the woman never made a wrong move, never tried to run. She just whispered soft words to the child in her own language. The snow kept falling, and the wind screamed. But now there was a new sound, small, faint, but real. The child coughed, then gave a weak little whimper. She was alive when they reached the edge of the human base. Jake looked around. He couldn't take them through the front, too risky. Instead, he led them through a side tunnel used for equipment delivery. They entered a dark storage room, filled with old parts and heating coils. Jake switched on a heat lamp and gave them a ration pack. The mother stared at the warm food like it was treasure. She opened it slowly. The child reached out with tiny hands. Jake watched them eat. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he asked, "What's your name?" The mother looked at him, eyes full of tired hope. "Sira," she said, "my daughter." Luma Jake sat down against the wall, heart heavy. He knew this was only the beginning. Someone would find out, and when they did, everything would change. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, for the first time in a long while, there was a little warmth. Jake sat in the shadows of the maintenance room, watching the heat lamp glow softly. Sira and her daughter Luma were asleep on the cold metal floor, wrapped in his thermal jacket. The ration pack lay empty beside them, and for the first time, the child's face looked peaceful. But peace wouldn't last. Not here. Not in a military outpost built for war. He looked at the time. Just 2 hours until the next patrol sweep. If anyone saw them, they would be arrested or worse. Aliens weren't allowed inside the base, no matter how helpless they were. Jake stood up quietly and stepped outside the storage unit, locking it from the outside. He walked fast through the hallway, helmet off, trying to look calm. Other soldiers nodded as he passed, and he nodded back, pretending nothing was wrong, but inside, his thoughts were spinning. Why did I do it? He whispered to himself. He wasn't sure. But something in Sira's eyes had broken through the armor he wore inside. Maybe it was her voice, her desperation. Or maybe it was the child's tiny fingers shaking from cold. He reached the infirmary and swiped his ID. The room was quiet. Only one medic on duty. Asleep at his desk, Jake moved quickly. Grabbing a small medical kit and 3 heat patches, he hesitated near the antibiotic drawer, then opened it. He didn't know what species Luma was or what she needed, but he knew she was sick. He turned to leave and froze. "Hey," said a voice from the corner. Jake looked up and saw Corporal Linda Voss leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "What are you doing in here this late?" Jake forced a smile. "Training prep. Just grabbing supplies for morning drills." She narrowed her eyes. Didn't know drills involved heat patches and child antibiotics. His stomach dropped. Voss wasn't stupid, and she didn't like surprises. Before she could ask more, Jake stepped forward, voice low. "Listen. I found something during patrol. Something not dangerous, but not cleared for command." Her expression changed, just slightly. "A tech. A relic." Jake shook his head. "A survivor. An alien mother and her daughter." Voss didn't react. At first, just blinked slowly. Then she stepped closer. "You're hiding them." Jake nodded once. "If I reported them, they'd be shipped off or killed." Voss frowned, thinking, "I should report you too." She said, "You could," Jake replied, "or you could help me save a child." There was silence between them, long and heavy. Finally, she sighed. "You've got 6 hours until morning inspection," she whispered. "After that, I can't protect you." Jake nodded in thanks and left quickly. Back in the storage unit, Sira woke up as he opened the door. She flinched, then relaxed when she saw him. He handed her the heat patches and medicine. She didn't ask where it came from, she just used it. Luma whimpered as the patch warmed. Her chest, her small hands reached out for her mother's fingers. Jake watched quietly. A strange tightness in his chest. Sira looked at him, eyes full of quiet fear and gratitude. "You risk much for us," she said. Jake shook his head. "No one should freeze to death on a planet they used to call home." Her eyes went dark. "Our home was taken, burned. My mate gone, my family gone." Jake lowered his gaze. "I didn't know," he said. Sira's voice trembled. "Humans call it peace, but peace with Ash is still war." The words hit him hard. He had always believed Earth's version of the story, that the alien species had refused peace. That they attacked first, but this didn't look like an enemy. It looked like a mother trying to keep her daughter alive. Suddenly, there was a knock on the outer door. Sharp and cold. Jake turned off the lamp and motioned for silence. He stepped out and closed the door behind him. At the end of the hallway stood Lieutenant Graves. Tall, cold-eyed, and strict. "Private Morgan," he said. "Why are you in the lower halls at this hour?" Jake saluted, forcing calm into his voice, conducting a system check. "Sir, temperature controls were misaligned in Sector 3. Graves stared at him for a moment. "Report to the tower in the morning," he said. "Security found strange. Footprints in the snow outside the fence non-human." Jake nodded, keeping his breath steady. "Yes, sir." Graves walked away, and Jake exhaled slowly. The net was tightening, and he didn't have much time. "Back inside," Sarah whispered. "They are hunting." Jake nodded grimly. "Yes. And if they find you, there will be no questions asked." He looked at Luma, who now slept with color returning to her cheeks. Then he looked at Sarah. "We have to get you out of here." She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said she already knew. Jake stared at the metal walls of the room. There was only one way out through the mining tunnels beneath the base. It was dangerous, dark, and full of forgotten tech and, maybe worse. But it was their only chance. And if Jake had to break every rule in the book to help them escape, then so be it. The alarm lights blinked in the distance, silent but red like blood. Jake stood in the corner of the mess hall, a metal tray in his hand, untouched food, going cold. Around him, soldiers laughed and talked, but his mind was far away. Down in the maintenance room, with them, Sarah and little Luma were still hidden. But time was against them. Every hour, the base tightened security. The footprints in the snow hadn't disappeared. And questions were growing louder. Jake took a slow breath and placed his tray back on the counter as he turned to leave. A voice stopped him. "Going somewhere? Private." It was Corporal Voss again, her tone low but sharp. She walked beside him as they stepped into the hallway. "You look nervous," she said. Jake didn't answer. She handed him a small data pad. Security feed from storage room 17 was accessed. "This morning," she said, "someone's going to notice what's missing." "And who's missing?" Jake opened the pad and saw a list of items taken from the medical bay, along with a heat lamp, enough clues to point fingers if someone wanted to. He sighed. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone." "Ha," he said. Voss leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "No one said you did, but if command finds out, they won't care why you did it." She paused, then added, "They're not going to stop with cameras next. They'll scan the rooms." Jake stopped walking. "There's a way out," he said. "A tunnel below the old mining route." Voss raised an eyebrow. "That tunnel's been sealed for years." Jake gave her a tight nod. "I broke the seal yesterday." She stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. "You're risking everything for a pair of strangers," she said. Jake looked her in the eyes. "They're not strangers to me anymore." Later that night, he returned to the maintenance room quietly. Sarah was awake, watching over Luma, who was now breathing easier. Jake knelt beside her and whispered, "They're coming. Maybe tomorrow." Sarah said nothing, but her grip tightened around her daughter. Jake looked at Luma and smiled gently. "She's stronger." "Today," Sarah nodded. "You gave her warmth. That is life on a planet like this." She turned to him, voice soft. "I want to tell you something." Jake tilted his head. She spoke slowly, carefully choosing English words. "My people. We are called Yanari. We lived here before the sky ships came. Before fire fell." Jake swallowed hard. He remembered the war briefings, primitive tribes, resistance, terror attacks. But none of those files had shown mothers in the snow, or children coughing in the cold. Sarah continued, "My daughter is different. Her father was a speaker." Jake looked confused. "Speaker?" Sarah's voice became distant, not like human leaders. "Our speakers connect with the living world plants, wind, even stone." She pointed at Luma's tiny hands. "She has the gift. But it's not awake yet." Jake stared at the child in silence. Then a sound snapped his attention. A soft beep from his wristpad, an internal message. Base-wide scan initiated Sector 3, included DTA. 1 hour, his heart pounded. "We have to go now," he said, standing quickly. Sarah nodded and picked up Luma gently, wrapping her again in the thick jacket. They moved fast through the side hallway, sticking close to the walls. The path led them to a locked steel door. With rust along the edges, Jake entered the code and pushed hard, the door groaning as it opened. Behind it was a staircase leading down into the dark. No lights, no cameras, just cold air and silence. Sarah hesitated at the top step. Jake turned. "It's safe," he said. She looked into the darkness and whispered, "It smells." Like old sorrow, he didn't know what that meant, but he didn't ask. They descended together. Jake in front with a light stick. The tunnel was narrow, made of old steel and rock. Rust dripped like tears down the walls, and broken machines lay dead along the path. Sarah's voice echoed softly, "This place remembers pain." Jake didn't respond. He felt it too, a heaviness in the air, as if the planet itself was watching. After an hour of walking, they stopped near an old power station. Jake looked at a broken generator and sighed. "We'll rest here, then move toward the surface exit in the morning." He turned to Saraba. Her face had changed. She was staring into the dark, unmoving, her body tense. "What is it?" Jake asked. Then he heard it too, a scraping sound deep in the tunnel. Something heavy dragging across metal. Luma whimpered in her sleep, and Sarah covered her ears gently. Jake raised his light and looked down the tunnel, but saw nothing. "Stay here," he said, stepping forward with his sidearm ready. The sound grew louder, closer, then suddenly stopped. Jake aimed into the dark, breath held, and then silence. He turned slowly, walking back to the others. Sarah looked up at him, her voice calm but serious. "You woke the tunnel," she said. Jake frowned. What?" She didn't explain. She just held her daughter tighter and whispered something in her native tongue, words that echoed strangely off the walls. Jake sat down, heart still racing. He didn't know what they had just heard, but he knew this. There were things down here older than war, older than humans, and the deeper they went, the more dangerous the truth would become. Darkness surrounded them like thick smoke. Jake sat with his back against the cold wall of the tunnel, listening to the silence, but silence had changed. It was no longer quiet, it was watching, waiting, alive. Sarah sat nearby, holding Luma close. The child was sleeping, but her fingers twitched like she was dreaming. Jake had seen soldiers cry in their sleep during war, but this was different. Luma was too young to have seen battle. Her dreams were full of fear. Jake looked at the tunnel map on his wristpad. The exit was far too far and blocked by collapsed rock. According to last scan, no one had used the lower escape tunnels in years. The military said they were unstable, haunted by past battles and forgotten creatures. Now, Jake believed them. He rubbed his face and whispered, "There has to be another way." Sarah opened her eyes slowly. "There is," she said, "but it's not on your map." Jake turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked down the tunnel, toward the place the scraping sound had come from earlier. "There are old paths, sacred paths. The ground remembers them even if humans do not." Jake frowned. "You mean your people used them?" She nodded. "Before the war, before the skyships came. We walked these tunnels like veins of the planet." Jake hesitated. "If you know a way out, show me." Sarah looked at Luma, then back at him. "It is not a safe path, not for humans, or for anyone who walks with fire in their heart." Jake didn't understand the meaning, but he nodded anyway. "Show me," he said again. She stood and walked forward, her steps slow and careful. Jake followed with his light stick, though. The air ahead grew thicker. Dust swirled in odd shapes, as if moving on its own. It wasn't natural, he could feel it in his bones. They reached a metal wall, rusted and covered in strange symbols. Sarah placed her hand on one, and two Jake's. Shock, the wall responded. A faint hum began. And then the wall shifted, sliding open with a breath-like sound. Behind it, a spiral path led downward, lit by glowing stones in the walls. The light was pale and blue, like moonlight underwater. Jake followed, his breath held. Each step made him feel smaller. Like the tunnel was pressing into his mind. At the bottom of the spiral, they entered a large cavern, wide, cold, and silent. In the center was a broken machine, part alien, part human, surrounded by ice. Sarah stopped beside it. "This was the first fire," she said. Jake stepped closer and saw that the machine had human markings. He touched the metal and felt a pulse faint, like a dying heartbeat. "What is this thing?" he asked. Sarah looked at the ceiling. "Your people brought it here to take energy, to mine life from the roots of this world." She placed Luma on the ground gently, but they didn't understand what they were digging into. Jake looked around. "This isn't just a tunnel, it's a burial ground." Sarah nodded. "A grave and a doorway." Suddenly, a crack echoed from above. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Jake pulled Luma back into his arms. From the shadows came a deep growl, low and ancient. Jake aimed his weapon, his voice tight. "Is that one of yours?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "That is a warden," she said. "Born to protect the old ways from firewalkers." The sound grew louder. Something big was moving in the dark, its footsteps like falling stones. Jake backed up, but there was nowhere to run. Sarah stepped forward and raised her voice, not in English, not in human words. It was a song, slow and strange, echoing like wind through bone. The growl stopped, replaced by silence. Then, from the dark, a massive shape stepped forward, part stone, part living creature. Its eyes glowed like burning coal, and its body shimmered with crystal veins. Jake raised his rifle. But Sarah placed a hand on his arm. "Do not," she said. Softly, he listens. The creature looked at Sarah, then at Luma. It let out a soft rumble, and then stepped aside, revealing a tunnel behind it, narrow but clear, leading up toward the surface. Jake was stunned. "You just talked to a monster." Sarah smiled. "No. I sang to a guardian." They walked past the warden, Jake holding Luma tightly. He didn't know what kind of power Sarah had, but it was ancient and real. After an hour, the tunnel began to warm. The smell of fresh air drifted in, and a faint light glowed ahead. They were near the surface, near freedom. But Jake's wristpad buzzed again. Incoming transmission. "Urgent, Morgan. Return to base immediately. Authorized access detected. Armed team deployed." His face went cold. "They're coming," he whispered. Sarah looked at him calmly. "Then we must not stop." Jake nodded, heart pounding again. No more hiding. No more delays. They had one path left forward, and he would protect them until the very end. Asterisk, the tunnel opened into sunlight. Cold, thin, but real. For the first time in days, Jake saw the sky. It was pale and full of clouds, stretching forever above the snow-covered cliffs. They had made it out, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Sarah stood at the edge of the cliff, Tata Luma, still asleep in her arms, behind them. The ancient warden's tunnel was now sealed by living stone. Jake looked back once more, remembering the hum of the strange creature. It hadn't attacked, it had listened, and that changed everything he thought he knew about this planet. He turned to Sarah. "There's an emergency shuttle tower northeast of here," he said, pointing over the icy ridge. "If we can reach it, we can signal for off-world transport." Sarah didn't speak, but her eyes followed his finger. She nodded slowly. then began walking without a word. Jake followed, both of them moving across frozen hills, each step heavy with tiredness and tension. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them had changed. It was not fear anymore. It was trust, ours. Passed, and the wind grew stronger. They found shelter in a broken transport pod halfway up the ridge. Inside, Jake built a fire using old tech scraps, the small flame giving them a circle of warmth. Sira sat close to Luma, rubbing her tiny fingers gently. Jake stared at them, then finally broke the silence. I don't understand how she did it. How she calmed that thing? Sira looked up. Because she is connected, she said. Jake frowned. Connected to what? Sira pointed down to the ground, to this world, to its memory, its pain. Jake shook his head slowly. I thought your kind were just survivors, primitives, hiding in the snow. Sarah's face remained calm, but her voice was sharp now. We were never primitive, only peaceful. She pulled out a small, glowing stone from her satchel. Jake recognized it was one of the energy crystals Earth had been mining, but it didn't just glot, pulsed, as if alive. This is not a power source, Sarat said. It is memory, frozen thought. It holds the voices of those who came before. Jake leaned forward. You mean your people used these to store knowledge? Sarah nodded. Before the war, we shared knowledge with the stars. She said, your ancestors came first, as friends, asking to learn, and we gave freely. Jake felt cold, even near the fire. Then what changed? Sira's eyes dimmed. They returned, not to learn, but to take. Her fingers tightened around the stone. Your commanders feared what we knew. Feared how we spoke to the living world, so they burned the forests, broke the crystals, and silenced the speakers. Jake looked at Luma, still sleeping, and now, she's the last. Sarah nodded slowly. She carries a bloodline nearly lost. One that can bring balance again, but only if she lives long enough to awaken it. Jake leaned back, stunned. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was history rewriting itself. He looked out the broken pod window. They'll never let her leave, he whispered. Earth's command doesn't want survivors. They want silence. Sira said nothing. But Jake could see the truth in her eyes, a quiet sadness, and a stronger fire beneath it. You said she's not ready yet? He asked. What would make her awaken? Sarah looked down at her daughter and whispered, pain, fear, or love. But I pray it is not pain. Suddenly, a sharp beep came from Jake's wrist pad. He looked down. Multiple signals detected UN military drones inbound DTA. 9 minutes, he stood quickly. They found us, he said. Sarah stood too, her body tired but steady. We cannot fight them. She said, no, Jake replied. But we can outrun them. He grabbed the last energy cell and strapped it into his thermal pack. We head for the tower. We climb if we have to. Snow began to fall again as they stepped out of the pod. But this time, it felt different, like the planet was watching them. Protecting them, the ridge was steep, wind pushing against them, but they kept moving, step by step. Closer to the old signal tower, rising like a broken finger in the distance. Luma stirred in her mother's arms, her eyelids fluttering. She reached toward Jake and touched his wrist. The moment she did, his wrist pad flashed, blinking strangely. Data symbols appeared on the screen, known, unreadable, and then gone. Jake looked at Sarah in shock. She just touched, it canned. It reacted. Sarah smiled softly. She's waking behind them. The drone hum grew louder, closer, sharper. Jake turned, gun in hand. But Sarat stopped him. No more weapons, she said. We must reach the top. And let her speak. Jake didn't fully understand what she meant. But he believed her. They ran, together, the ridge shaking beneath their feet. And somewhere in the wind, a voice began to rise, not human, not alien, but something in between. Luma's voice, soft but growing stronger. Like the planet itself had begun to remember her. Asterisk snow exploded around their boots as they ran. The signal tower rose like a broken skeleton at the top of the ridge, its metal frame covered in frost. Antennas bent. Cables swinging like vines in the wind. Jake's lungs burned with every breath. His legs were tired, but he didn't stop. Behind him, Sarah climbed carefully, one hand holding Luma tight, the other gripping the icy rocks. Drones buzzed in the distance, getting closer. The final chase had begun. "We're almost there," Jake shouted. His voice was stolen by the wind, but Sarah nodded. Her eyes locked on the tower ahead. Luma's small hand clutched her mother's coat. Her eyes were open, now glowing faintly. They reached the tower base just as the first drone appeared. It hovered silently above the ridge, its scanners lighting up like a red sun. Jake ducked behind a steel beam and raised his weapon. "Get to the top," he yelled. "Activate the beacon. I'll hold them off." Sarah hesitated. More drones were coming, 3, then 5, then 7. Flying in a perfect pattern, circling. Above like vultures, Jake fired a warning shot. Hitting the closest one in the sensor core, it spun wildly and crashed into the cliff below. But the others shifted formation and returned fire. Bright pulses lit the air as Jake rolled behind cover, shouting into his wristpad. "Emergency code 7, civilian extraction priority 1, come on. Someone hear me." Up above, Sarah climbed the tower, her hands raw and shaking. The metal was sharp, frozen and old. But she kept going, one step at a time. Luma clung to her like a shadow. The child's glow grew brighter with every heartbeat. Down below, another blast hit the ground near Jake. He fell, rolled, then stood again, face burned. But still fighting, he looked up at the tower and shouted. "Now, Sarah, send the signal." At the top of the tower, Sarah reached the control panel. The old screen was cracked, flickering with static. She pressed her palm against it and whispered in her native tongue. The screen flashed red, then blue, then green, then nothing. Jake fired again, screaming in frustration. Another drone exploded in midair, but 2 more moved in behind him. One fired and a pulse blast hit Jake's back. He dropped to his knees, gasping, his visor cracked, snow pouring into his collar. Then everything changed. A sound cut through the air, soft at first, like a hum, then louder, like music, made of wind and light. The drones froze in place, their lights blinking wildly. Jake looked up, dazed. What is that? At the top of the tower, Luma stood alone now, arms raised. Sarah had collapsed beside her, watching with wide eyes. Luma's glow spread across the metal, flowing like water. Her voice rose, not words, but pure sound. The sound touched the drones, touched the snow, touched the sky. One by one, the drones shut down and fell from the air. Silent as feathers, the storm began to calm. The clouds above parted, just enough for light to break through. Jake stared in disbelief. Luma had stopped a war machine with her voice. Not with weapons, not with fire, but with something older. Something forgotten. Above them, a beam of light shot from the tower into the sky. The emergency signal had been sent. Somewhere in orbit, someone would see it. Someone would come. Sarah stood weakly, whispering to her daughter. Jake limped toward the tower, his blood running down his back, but he smiled. "You did it," he said softly. "You woke her." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. She spoke. For the world, far in the distance, engines roared. A dropship appeared on the horizon, rising over the cliffs like a giant hawk. But this one wasn't from Earth Command. It carried no flags, no soldiers. Only a strange golden light in its engine solder technology. Not human-made. Jake turned to Sirach, confused. She smiled through the cold. "You thought we had no friends left," she said, "but the stars remember us." The ship lowered silently, touching the snow with barely a sound. A ramp unfolded, revealing tall robed figures with glowing eyes. They were not human. But not strangers either. Ancient allies, awakened by Luma's voice. Jake looked back. One last time, he saw the smoking wrecks of drones, the shattered tower, and the rising sun. A planet that had once been silent was now singing again. He took Sarah's hand and stepped onto the ship. Luma followed, her glow fading gently. Knock on just resting as the ship lifted into the sky, leaving the snow behind. Jake closed his eyes. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew this. He hadn't just saved a life. He had helped save a truth, and for the first time in his life, he felt human. The stars looked different from up here, not like the ones on Earth too far. Too silent, too old. Jake Morgan stood at the window of the alien starship, watching the planet Kiros 9 grow smaller behind him. Snow still covered it, storms still danced over its icy lands, but something had changed. Something deep inside. It's something awake. Sarah sat nearby, holding Luma in her lap. The child no longer glowed, but her breathing was calm, steady, like the hum of the ship itself. The robed aliens who had rescued them, guardians of a forgotten alliance, moved without words. Their eyes shimmered with the same light Jake had seen in the crystals. In the tunnels in Luma, no one spoke, but everything spoke at the same time, through feeling, energy, memory. Jake turned from the window and walked toward Sarah. "She's asleep again," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. She gave more than she had. But the world gave some back. Jake knelt beside her. "I don't understand what that was." The voice, the ship, these people, what is this? Sarah placed her hand over Luma's heart. "This is not rescue," she said. "This is return." Jake looked at the robed beings. "Are they your kind too?" Sarah shook her head gently. "No, they are from the old sky friends of the Yanari before the flames came." Jake remembered the stories Earth had erased. Stories of peace, of shared science and old songs. Stories rewritten by war, greed, and fear. He sat down on the glowing floor, his voice low. "We destroyed so much." Sarah didn't answer for a moment. Then she said, "Not everything, not all." She looked at him. "You chose to protect instead of destroy. You listened." Jake stared at his own hands. "I'm just one soldier." Sarah smiled. "And Luma is just one child. Yet together, you changed everything, above them." The ship passed through a light field, stars bending, reshaping, whispering as they moved. Jake felt it in his chest, like a song with no sound, a memory not his own. Images flashed in his mind, cities made of crystal, voices without mouths, forests that spoke through wind. Then gone. He blinked, breathing hard. What was that? Sarah looked at him softly. "The ship is showing you the past. It knows you now." Jake stood up, confused but no longer afraid. He walked to the center of the chamber where the light was strongest. The robed guardians gathered around him, not to judge, but to understand. One of them reached out and touched his chestnut painfully, just a brief contact. A vision opened in Jake's mind. Earth, but not as it was now. Earth with clean skies. Human and alien working side by side. Cities powered by living light. Schools filled with many species. A future not lost but hidden. Jake gasped and stepped back. What was that? Sarah spoke gently from behind. Hope. The guardians stepped aside. And a console opened from the floor, inside it. A glowing orb sat pulsing, familiar and ancient. It was the core of a speaker's memory. Sarah stepped forward. "This is for her," she said, placing her hand above the orb. "For Luma, when she is ready." Jake looked at her. "What happens now?" Sarat turned to him. "We do not run anymore. We rebuild, with truth, not lies." Jake nodded. "I want to help." Sarat smiled. "You already did, more than you know." Luma stirred in her sleep and whispered something, one word: imperfect. English home. Jake's throat tightened. It wasn't Earth she meant. It was something bigger. Older, deeper, the ship began to slow, a glowing blue planet coming into view, lush. Alive, untouched, a sanctuary forgotten by war, hidden by time. It was where the Yanari would begin again. And where Luma's journey would truly start. Jake watched as the ship descended. He didn't know if he'd ever return to Earth. Maybe he wouldn't, maybe he couldn't, but deep in his heart, he knew something had changed in him forever. The soldier was gone. What remained was something better, someone who had seen truth and chosen the harder path. As the ship landed, its doors opened to warm air and golden trees. Luma opened her eyes, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Thank you." For the warm meal, Jake laughed, tears slipping from his eyes. It was such a small thing. But maybe that's how change always starts, one small thing, in the right moment, with the right heart, above them. The stars continued to turn, but now they turned with hope, and below them, on this new world, a new dawn began.